Great. So yeah, thanks, Trevor, and good afternoon, everybody. My presentation is going to be relatively short. I do want to leave plenty of time to get onto the real substance of this afternoon, which is the presentations from Fiona and Guy, and indeed the discussion and gap analysis at the end. But I think it is worthwhile me just briefly introducing Future Woodland Scotland and our urban forestry programme. So Future Woodland Scotland, we're a charity. We've been around for about 13 years. Primarily, we've been active in the field of native woodland restoration and indeed research and innovation in relation to native woodlands. But more recently, we've moved into urban forestry, and I will tell you a little bit more about our urban forestry program in just a moment. But it's probably worthwhile just setting out a couple of definitions. What is the urban forest? There's lots of definitions out there. I've gone with this one. The urban forest is, or it comprises all the trees and shrubs in the urban realm, in the public and private spaces. So the diagram on the right there is just trying to portray that, the whole variety of spaces that the urban forest is in, and the fact that it is part of that wider category of green infrastructure. But it is a category of infrastructure, the urban forest, that merits its own dedicated approach to its management. So when we're dealing with the green infrastructure, obviously you need a multidisciplinary approach. You need your planners, you need your green space managers, your landscape architects, your ecologists. But if you're dealing with the urban forest, you also need that arboricultural expertise. So I think that's worth bearing in mind, and that's why we have the definition here of urban forestry, the art, science, and technology of managing trees and forest resources in and around urban communities. This slide very succinctly sets out the benefits of trees. I think we're all quite familiar with the kind of carbon benefits and biodiversity benefits of trees. But in an urban context, we see a whole host of other benefits that this slide captures. So we're talking about surface water flooding mitigation and tackling noise pollution, air pollution, and then a whole host of social and health and well-being benefits for people. But these benefits only really accrue if we have an extensive and well-managed urban forest. So that's what we're keen to progress today, and that's what our vision is. Our vision for the urban forestry program is that we make progress over the next 10 years towards the 330-300 rule. I imagine some of you will have heard of this rule, but I'd be interested to know. I think Trevor will do a poll either now or towards the end of this presentation to establish just how many of you are familiar with it. It simply states that we should all be able to see 3 trees from where we live. We should all live in neighbourhoods with 30% canopy cover, and we should all live within 300 metres of a quality green space. It's a concept that was developed by Cecil Konynendijk of the Nature-Based Solutions Institute a few years back, and it's really taking off in Europe, but more widely across the world in terms of its application in towns and cities. The UN there describes it as a simple yet powerful framework for building healthier, climate resilient and more livable cities. And there's science behind these figures. These figures aren't arbitrary. The 330-300, the headline on the bottom right there is just one of a number of recent articles recently on the evidence behind the 30% there for mitigating the effects of heat waves. How are we doing in Scotland when it comes to some of these figures and these targets? Well, not great. In Scotland, canopy cover is around 17, maybe 18%, which obviously doesn't compare very well with a target of 30%, and doesn't really compare very well with the rest of Europe, for that matter, where the average canopy cover in towns and cities is much closer to that 30% figure. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have our urban forestry program. We launched it last year. It's a 10-year program, and we have 10 million to put towards urban forestry. The funds are coming from this company here, Geranex BP, which you probably haven't heard of before. It only came into existence during the summer. It's an independent joint venture formed by Geranex, which is a Japanese utility firm, and BP. So it's now a global renewables firm, and the funds that are behind our urban forestry program are particularly associated with the Morven wind farm that Geranex BP are developing off the east coast of Scotland. So some of that money, or a good deal of that money, is going towards supporting local authorities, ENGOs, and community groups in urban forestry projects, kind of on-the-ground projects. But we're very conscious that to make progress on that 17% canopy cover figure will take a lot more than projects on the ground, as it were. We really need to change how we manage and develop our towns and cities. One kind of fact that sticks with me from my time at the City of Edinburgh Council, where I worked in the Green Spaces Service, was that the fact that we were losing over 6 hectares of vegetated land per annum. That's more than 8 football pitches of vegetated land per annum to the phenomenon of urban creep. So people building over their gardens to put in driveways and extensions and so on. So if you combine that kind of significant loss of green space per annum with the fact that we're still building housing estates and developments with canopy cover that's quite low, in the low teens or even into single-digit figures, you can see that we're really going to struggle to make progress on that target of 30% canopy cover. So that's why we want to also build capacity in the sector. We want to promote best practice. We want to build the evidence base, and we want to work with other stakeholders to advocate for 3300 and for tree equity. And that's why we were very happy to support the 4th Climate Forest in commissioning that study on canopy cover that Guy will take us through shortly. And it's why we approached Trevor and the Improvement Service with a view to putting on this webinar. And we do see this as the first in a series of webinars. We had in mind that we would put together about 3 webinars over the course of the year. We'd really be interested to get your feedback and input into what topics you'd like to see at future webinars. So please do contribute to the gap analysis later on. And quite apart from that, if there is other ways we can support planners and other local authority officials in delivering on your work, we're interested to hear that. Quite apart from the webinars, it could be a training module that needs to be developed and delivered. It could be additional guidance, or it could be additional data or evidence-based material that's needed. We're very open to discussions on that. And the last thing in this respect that I'll mention is the Trees Planning and Development Conference. There was a conference held in Stirling back in 2023 that I'm sure some of you will have attended, and it's often been cited to me as having been a great event in terms of galvanizing efforts and bringing stakeholders together towards progressing the cause of urban forestry. So we're keen to see that happen again, and we'll be putting on a conference around about this time next year, where we hope to see great input from planners, but also from other stakeholders. So we'll be able to share a bit more detail on that in the coming weeks. I think that's it from me. I've got a final slide there is just contact details. So if anyone does want to make direct contact with me to discuss these matters or to propose ideas, I'd be very open to that. So thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you, Trevor. Hello, everyone. As an arboricultural and urban forestry consultant, my work includes delivery and presentation of BS 5837 tree surveys and arboricultural report. I'm passionate about how we protect, expand and connect our urban forests for people and for nature. But sometimes I see a lack of consistency in the application of key policies and an understanding of BS 5837 practice. Tools which are designed to protect and expand our valuable urban forest resource. Scotland's planning teams can and should play a key role in delivery of policy outcomes for our urban forests, supported by best arboricultural practice. But I know our planning teams are struggling with ever-increasing caseloads and ever-decreasing resources in terms of funding, arboricultural expertise, training and much-needed support from Scottish Government. In this presentation, I want to engage and empower you to leverage the key National Planning Framework 4 policies designed to protect and expand the individual trees, woodlands, shrubs and hedgerows that make up our urban forests. And I will illustrate how key elements of BS 537 best practice can support you when assessing development proposals. Our urban forests provide important canopy cover. They must be robust, resilient, able to cope with their surroundings and impacts from a changing climate, not to mention coping with the potential impacts from developments. Our urban forests also include irreplaceable habitats that are ancient and veteran trees, ancient woodlands and ancient wood pasture. And again, let's not forget the benefits of trees. So the urban forest delivers on many NPF 4 policies, but policies 3 biodiversity and 6 forestry, woodland and trees offer the greatest leverage for the protection and expansion of this valuable resource. And here's why. The urban forest is a significant component of biodiversity. It is a key element for strengthening and creating robust nature networks and is well placed to deliver powerful nature-based solutions. The urban forest should be treated as critical infrastructure for all development proposals, large or small. The National Planning Framework 4 puts the climate and nature crisis at the heart of planning conditions. NPF 4 is designed to deliver Scottish Government statutory outcomes, one of which is securing positive outcomes for biodiversity. The implications of NPF 4 for the urban forest are that it is better protected, loss of irreplaceable habitats will not be supported, it is connected, expanded and recorded. Its sustainable management is supported and informed by robust forestry and woodland strategies embedded in local development plans. Importantly, the mitigation hierarchy underpins the protection framework within NPF 4. And this must form the benchmark when assessing development proposals. So the hierarchy is a critical 4-step process when designing and assessing development proposals containing trees, shrubs and hedgerows. It has to be uppermost in your minds when assessing applications against the biodiversity and forestry, woodland and trees policies. Ask yourselves the questions: can impacts be avoided? If not, have they been effectively minimised? And how will losses be restored? Planning submissions should clearly demonstrate that due process has been followed with clear evidence that the appropriate professionals have been engaged at the earliest opportunity. BS 537 is currently under revision and it will be published as a code of practice in 2026. The British Standard follows a logical sequence of events that has tree care at the heart of the process, and it's for use by everyone who has the potential to impact trees during the design, development and construction phases. This includes architects, landscape architects, engineers, builders and statutory undertakers. BS 537 best practice can support the delivery of NPF 4 key policy outcomes and can assist planning teams to make informed decisions around trees on development sites. So the 3 main phases in the BS 587 process seek to ensure that trees are protected from impacts arising during the initial and detailed design and construction stages, and the opportunities for urban forest expansion and connectivity are identified, with provision made using detailed method statements for the successful implementation of protection measures, new planting and aftercare. To understand how BS 5837 can support policy and assist planning teams, I'm going to focus on the BS 5837 tree survey identified at the feasibility and planning stage. This is the critical element in the process for you to understand exactly what information you should expect to see presented clearly in the arboricultural report submitted with the planning application. So I've listed here the key elements from the tree survey which provide planning teams with the necessary detailed information to assist with their assessments against the relevant NPF4 policy outcomes. I cannot stress how critical it is for the arboriculturalist and ecologist to be engaged at the earliest opportunity. Not only can it help the safe retention and integration of existing trees and habitats, but it can save everyone, including planning teams, a lot of valuable time and effort. The planning team should expect to see the trees, shrubs and hedgerows evaluated and accounted for in the tree survey and detailed tree plans. Key baseline data collected against the existing site layout provides an accurate picture of the location, extent and type of canopy cover present within the development envelope. In an ideal world, this baseline information informs the design, but more often than not, we're brought in once the design has moved beyond the conceptual stage, and this may also include detailed landscape design plans. So to illustrate the tree survey, I've chosen a successful eco-build project I was involved with located in Dundee, where sustainable living, connectivity with nature and food productivity was very much key. It was a challenging site, but has in my view all the components of an urban forest within its boundary. The tree survey requires a recent and accurate topographic survey of the site, with the site boundary clearly identified before accurate baseline data can be collected and presented. So looking at the topo, I can already see the extent of existing canopy cover, adjacent trees, the existing site layout and access routes. At this stage, I'll also look at Google Maps for comparison to see if there are any significant discrepancies in canopy cover. I can zoom out to give me an idea of where there might be opportunities to increase or enhance canopy and connectivity, and I can see if there are mature trees and connective linear features. I'll also carry out a desktop survey for any special designations on this site. All the trees are protected under a tree preservation order. So before going on, I want to explain tree categorisation and the root protection area. The survey records trees, significant shrub masses and hedgerows. These are assessed against the current BS 5837 colour-coded categories A, B and C for high, moderate and low quality, or U for removal. A, B and C are further subcategorised for their arboricultural, landscape, cultural and/or conservation value. The current category for veteran trees and ancient woodland would always be A3, but the BS 5837 revision will include a new V category for veteran trees. Tree categorisation allows us to easily identify A and B categories for retention wherever possible, although we shouldn't forget that C and U category trees can also have considerable biodiversity value and may also warrant retention. So the root protection area is identified in tree plans usually as a magenta coloured circle and is a purely theoretical calculation of 12 times the stem diameter of the tree, and it must be applied in conjunction with arboricultural expertise. Roots invariably grow well beyond the RPA depending on existing site conditions and do not always grow in a perfect circle, if ever. The RPA may be modified depending on obstructions to growth, but the same area must be maintained. The RPA model here is based on a tree with a stem diameter of 60 centimetres and an RPA radius of 7.2 metres. The maximum allowable radius is currently capped at 15 metres. For ancient and veteran trees in ancient woodland, the standing government advice in England recommends 15 times stem diameter or 5 metres beyond the canopy extents, whichever is the greater. And this is likely to be adopted in the BS 5837 revision. So the RPA represents the minimum soil volume required, but does not take into account future growth requirements, which very much challenges the long-term retention of trees in the landscape. Importantly, the RPA establishes a construction exclusion zone, unless otherwise agreed with the project arboriculturalist, and where temporary protection measures can be put in place. Now, depending on the tree, the species and the available rooting area, it may be permissible to lose a portion of the designated RPA to facilitate some element of the design. But at all times, it is important for the design team to listen to and follow the advice and expertise of the arboriculturalist. So here, tree plans can get very busy, and the following example layouts are extracted from complete plans, which obviously have a legend, a scale bar, a north arrow, and further annotations. The tree constraints plan visualises the trees, shrubs, and hedgerows against the existing site layout with their respective tag numbers, colour coding, and RPA. The plan shows the above and below ground constraints that these features might place on site development. The arboriculturalist will pick up special habitat trees, veteran and potential veteran trees, those with bat and bird potential, and any other habitat features of the site identifiable within their expertise. We will also flag up trees or other features requiring further investigation by the ecologist. It is critical that we work together and share information. Opportunities for expansion of canopy cover and connectivity within and beyond the site are also explored. So all the dimensions, measurements and observations in the field are exported to a spreadsheet, which forms the tree survey schedule appended to the arboricultural report. Planning teams may wish to look at this schedule and pick out mature or older trees just to see where they fit in within the site. Now, this image is purely a visual depiction of what the tree survey schedule looks like. I don't expect you to read it. I include summary action columns for trees pre and post arboricultural impact assessment, where removals are highlighted in red. Any removals arising from the development should also be summarised in the main report. So the arboricultural impact assessment is made against the proposed design, which replaces the existing layout. It identifies potential impacts to trees, and with the mitigation hierarchy uppermost in my mind, I ask whether impacts could be avoided or minimised using BS 5837 best practice solutions. I've coloured in the tree canopies. It's not a BS 5837 recommendation, but I feel it does allow the reader to easily identify the proportion of tree categories and any additional removals arising directly from design proposals. I assess where protection and precautionary measures are required, and I'll ask the design team how site setup and access is proposed. They might not know for sure at this point, but it does bring potential site management and ongoing tree protection sharply into focus. And it's useful to mention here that canopy cover is helpful to visualise potential decrease and increase in cover. There's not yet a definitive approach to canopy cover assessment, but it is a simple and valuable 2D metric which establishes an important baseline that can be used in conjunction with site-wide biodiversity quantification. And I'm not going to get into potential biodiversity metrics for Scotland here, that's a whole other presentation. So the collection of baseline information in the field and the arboricultural impact assessment culminates in the tree protection plan, which may be a draft at this stage requiring fine-tuning once all the potential impacts, including service routes and final designs, are known. This plan must be supported by a robust method statement, which informs the site operatives as to how and when events take place to prevent damage to trees before, during and after construction phase. So the protection fencing shown in black here creates a construction exclusion zone, where access to the wider site and protected trees is strictly prohibited. The GeoWeb temporary ground protection shown in orange was installed on this site to protect soils for future food growing and to protect a lovely specimen copper beech tree adjacent to the main site access from unavoidable encroachment into its RPA. Critically, ground protection allowed the limited site area to be effectively utilised by operatives whilst minimising impacts during construction. The precautionary measures shown in light blue include temporary retention of existing hard surfacing for a 40-ton demolition crane which demolished the original house, and for the mature black poplar there in the northeast corner where a gabion wall installation was unavoidable in a small portion of its RPA. The tree protection plan was pinned up in the site office, I kid you not, along with the method statement and relevant site guidance notes, which I'll come on to. The arboriculturalist maintains a written and photographic site record of protection measures and any changes normally submitted to planning at site sign-off. If any member of your planning team is unsure about interpreting any part of the BS 5837 information, then please seek guidance and support from colleagues in your team who have arboricultural knowledge and expertise, or better still, arrange a site visit with the project arboriculturalist. And here are some examples of impacts to trees that can and do happen on sites, including major root severance and serious soil compaction. So planning conditions, site supervision and enforcement should ensure all components of the urban forest are actually protected during and after construction. The Manual for Managing Trees on Development Sites, developed by Jeremy Barrell, a leading arboricultural consultant, contains 12 site guidance notes which are very easy to follow and can be downloaded to your phone via the relevant QR code. And these provide technical guidance to address issues that arise during the construction phase. The manual is directly aligned with the current BS 5837 guidance, but the difference is this is free. And examples of robust fencing, signage and ground protection. So now the construction phase is successfully completed and we look to implementing the opportunities for expansion we identified early on in the process. So this is a schematic landscape plan for our example site. The client was very hands-on and very passionate about connecting people and nature by creating a forest garden and plan. And you can clearly see how this space was enriched with a range of canopy cover from high forest trees, fruit trees, foraging hedgerows, to a vegetable garden and wildlife pond. Plant species and planting methodology were clearly specified and supported by a post-planting maintenance plan conditioned by the planning team. Overall, canopy cover was increased on this site. As with all projects, key detailed information, effective communication and collaboration with the right people at the right time enables positive outcomes where trees are successfully integrated with design. And so to summing up, the urban forest delivers on many of Scotland's national planning framework 4 policies and must be treated as critical infrastructure for any development proposal. The mitigation hierarchy embedded in NPF 4 must be the assessment benchmark, with BS 5837 practice providing key information to support planning teams in making informed decisions around trees. The sooner tree professionals are involved in the process, the better, and this includes your tree officers and planning teams. I believe with collaboration, communication, and technical guidance, all components of the urban forest can be better integrated into design from the outset. If Scottish Government is going to achieve statutory outcomes to tackle the climate and nature crisis, then it must unreservedly support the planning teams at the coalface of NPF 4 delivery through provision of appropriate resources, training and in-house expertise. I believe consistent application of key NPF 4 policies and the mitigation hierarchy, supported by a thorough understanding of BS 5837 and the information it provides, can and will empower our planning teams to protect and expand our valuable urban forests. And just to finish, I've put together some useful links and resources for you, including links to the Trees and Design Action Group canopy cover guides and the Arboricultural Association's online training pages. Thank you so much for listening.
So hello everybody, and thank you for letting me speak to you this afternoon. I will give you a brief introduction to the Forth Climate Forest and then talk about our recently completed analysis of canopy cover in new developments. So let me start by telling you what is the Forth Climate Forest. At its most basic, it's a tree planting initiative that aims to combat the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. Our activities are focused around 4 key themes, with canopy being the most relevant to this presentation. Now you'll note that our canopy target is listed there at 20%, and this figure is taken from a paper by Kieran Duik and others published through Forest Research's Urban Research Group in 2016, and there's a link at the bottom of the slide there that'll give you access to the paper. It recommended a minimum canopy cover of 20% for Scottish towns and cities to help alleviate the expected impacts of climate change. Now, more recently, and Des talked about this, there's the 3-30-300 rule, which has been developed and promotes a 30% canopy cover. But what both of these initiatives highlight is the multiple benefits of increasing our urban tree canopy cover, or as Fiona just said, our urban forest. So just to say that the Forth Climate Forest is a partnership initiative hosted by the University of Stirling, and those are our partners and our funders highlighted in the box on the right. We cover the Clackmannanshire, Falkirk and Stirling areas, and so also include about 60% of the Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park. So we have 4 planning authorities within our patch, and they are active partners within this project. I'll also mention that Forth Climate Forest is one of 3 climate forest initiatives. So if you see the map on the right, you've got Forth Climate Forest sitting in the middle there, with Clyde Climate Forest to the south, which covers the 8 local authority areas of the Glasgow and Clyde Valley region, and the recently created Fife Climate Forest to the east, which covers the Fife Council area. Now, although I'm talking about the Forth Climate Forest in my presentation, a lot of what I say will be applicable to both those other projects, as they're very similar and have similar aims and objectives. So our canopy activities are focused on the settlements within our area, and you can see those in the map on the left. And as I say, we're working to increase canopy cover across them all. By way of an example, the 2 images on the right are taken from Tillicutri and Clackmannanshire, where I stay. The image at the top, you can see that's a street with virtually no, if not any, tree canopy cover. So on hot days, those residences will suffer from the heat, and there'll be surface water issues when it rains. Whereas the image at the bottom has a more mature tree canopy that provides shade, that intercepts rainfall and helps to alleviate some of the impacts of our changing climate. So I've mentioned that our target is 20%. And to achieve this, we must protect what we already have. Fiona's talked about the value of mature trees and mature urban trees. And we do lose trees, and we will lose trees for a variety of reasons. So we need to be planting trees just to maintain what we've got, let alone to increase our urban tree canopy cover towards our target. Hence, we have that second canopy target there of increasing knowledge and appreciation within communities and amongst key stakeholders of the importance of trees and the benefits that they provide. So we have a target, but we need to know where we are starting from. We commissioned university colleagues at the University of Stirling to map the existing tree canopy across all the settlements within our project area. To do this, they developed an artificial intelligence model to identify and quantify trees from aerial photographs. And they mapped over 170,000 trees that sit within or adjacent to the settlements within our project area. And the two images you can see there are snapshots taken from the outputs of that modelling. The data, as you might expect, showed huge variability in canopy, not just across settlements, but within settlements themselves. There are a small number of areas. Well, let me take a step back. There are 1 or 2 settlements within that entire project area that meet that minimum 20% canopy area at the moment. But within other settlements, within the data zones, we used the government's data zones that they use for the SIMD data. There are some of those that reach 20%, and an example's given at the top there. That's a data zone from Tullibody, which has achieved that 20% canopy target. Most sit around 8 to 12%, and the lowest, shown in the image at the bottom, is a data zone in Cornton in Stirling, which sits at 2% canopy cover. So to achieve our target, we need to deliver change. And as I say, we're working with partners and communities across the project area to do that. And we're also working to integrate the 4th Climate Forest targets with national and local plans, policies and strategies. Now, you'll appreciate that retrofitting trees in an urban setting is complex and often expensive. And so planning has a role to play in ensuring that new developments and projects make a positive contribution to these targets. You can imagine if new projects and significant developments are not delivering this 20 or 30% tree canopy target, then we're taking backward steps rather than moving forwards. There are examples of canopy targets within local planning policy, and I've included links to a few down the bottom there. And we, through the 4th Climate Forest, are actively in discussion with our 4 planning authority partners about including a tree canopy target in local planning policy through the local development plans that are currently being drawn up. I know there's a few of them on the call, so I hope they don't mind me saying that they've said they're okay with the principle of it, but asked us to show that it was feasible before they included a policy that couldn't be achieved. So to answer the question, we decided to analyse selected developments within our project area, and that's what I'll talk about now, our canopy analysis of new developments. So this work was funded by the 4th Climate Forest and by Future Woodlands Scotland, and carried out by the Green Action Trust, who also provided many of the slides that form the presentation from here on in. So 2 sites were selected in each of the Clackmannanshire, Falkirk and Stirling Planning Authority areas. We looked at including examples from the National Park planning area as well, but as they have fewer larger developments, it wasn't feasible at this stage. And the sites were selected through discussion with the planners, and we chose 1 site within each area that had been completed, and 1 site where planning permission had been granted, but development had not yet been completed, or in some cases started. The first step was a desktop analysis of the proposals, and table 1 shows the tree cover prior to development. And I'm not going to dwell on it because the nature of the sites, they were quite agricultural sites, meant that there weren't many trees there, and where there were trees, they tended to be removed. So we can assume that every site started at 0. Table 2 shows the amount of canopy cover that would be delivered through the approved landscape drawings that accompanied each application. Column 2 there just shows the area that was actually shown on the drawings, and you'll appreciate that often landscape drawings have a symbol that represents a tree, or an indication, but not an accurate indication of the canopy that that tree will achieve. So given this lack of information on the species that was planted and the size that it might achieve, we applied a larger area, and that's column 3 there, which is the same trees in the same locations, but assuming this mature tree size. And this mature tree size, it'll be referred to a few times as I go on, is the average tree canopy size taken from that 170,000 trees that we mapped through the exercise I told you about a second ago. So it's a pretty robust average of urban trees across the fourth climate forest area. And you'll see from that table that sites 1, 4 and 5 would have achieved that 20% tree canopy target just through the trees that were included in the approved landscape plans for each development. So I'll now look at sites 3 and 5 in a bit more detail to talk you through some of the steps that were undertaken in this analysis. This is a map of site 3 and it shows tree planting taken from that approved landscape plan and has had that average mature tree canopy size applied. So that's the orange dots shown on the map. And you see there that that planting alone would have delivered just over 10% tree canopy cover. Whereas for site 5, the same information's been plotted and it's achievable. It could have achieved 23% tree canopy cover just from those trees that were included in the landscape plans. So going back to the number of trees needed to achieve different canopy targets, table 1 there, you'll remember that sites 1, 4 and 5 already achieved 20%, so they didn't need any additional trees. For sites 2, 3 and 6, there are columns there that list the number of trees of various sizes that would need to be added to achieve that 20% target. And the choice of canopy widths within those columns, that 3, 4 and 5 metre wide canopy, reflect native species that may well be planted within these developments. And that data is taken from the Handbook of UK Urban Tree Allometric Equations and Size Characteristics. The link is in the slide there, which provides scientific data on the size that these species of trees achieve within UK urban settings. That final column is the 9.4 metre wide average tree canopy size within our project area. And again, there are a range of trees within that UK handbook that will reach that size. So it's a realistic indication of tree size. Table 2 shows that same information for each of those sites to achieve that 30% canopy target. So you'll see that there are a few there that are close. What it's important to note is that the canopy provided by those largest trees is 10 times the canopy provided by those 3 metre wide trees. And so it's something we're trying to get across to developers, that your choice of tree species can have a massive impact on the amount of canopy cover that they provide. So to determine if it was possible to include these additional trees within the planned development, within its existing layout, the Green Action Trust used GIS and applied an algorithm to randomly assign trees. Now, we applied some fairly harsh restrictions to this algorithm in that tree canopies could not overlap, that the tree canopy could not overlap with hard infrastructure, and that only the largest canopies could be used. So we made it intentionally difficult to say, if you can do it with these harsh restrictions, it will be a lot easier in practice. And in reality, tree canopies can and should overhang paths and roads, and smaller trees can be used to fit into smaller spaces. But as you can see for the results here for site 3, the orange dots are the same as they were before. They're the trees taken from the landscape plan. The green are additional trees that were allocated into existing green spaces, and the purple are trees that are allocated to private gardens. And it's not possible, given the restrictions that we placed on the algorithm, to achieve 20% for that site. Whereas site 5 can achieve over 30% with the same restrictions on that algorithm. So these two tables show what can be achieved with what I've just said. So sites 1, let me take a step back. Looking at the data that we have, as I said initially, with just the trees that would have been planted on the landscape plans, 3 out of 6 of those sites could reach the 20% target. If the additional trees were allocated by that algorithm, then 5 out of the 6 can achieve the 20% target, and 3 out of 6 can achieve the 30% target. So achieving that canopy target is feasible, and that's without any changes to layout or without tree canopy being specifically considered at any point in the process. So the Green Action Trust visited sites 3 and 5, which had been completed a few years ago, to survey the trees and compare them with the landscape plans, just to see how the canopy was developing. And for site 3, it's not a bad comparison. The grey dots show where the trees were proposed to be planted on the approved landscape plans, and the coloured dots are where trees of various species were actually found on site. So not a bad comparison. Whereas for site 5, the vast majority of the trees were never planted. There's loads of grey dots there, and they don't have coloured dots anywhere near them. So you might recall that the site was expected to deliver a canopy of 23% based on the approved planting plan. What it's actually likely to deliver, should these trees meet maturity, is a canopy cover of just 7%, so a third of what was expected. So the aim of this analysis was to show if achieving canopy cover of 20 or 30% was feasible, and I think we've shown that it is. And as I say, this is looking at developments after they've been planned or constructed. If tree canopy was considered earlier in the design process, then it should be even easier to meet these targets. Of course, achieving the target requires the trees to be planted as planned, which is often not the case. And as Fiona's already said, the National Planning Framework 4 supports developments designed to adapt to climate change, and minimum canopy cover targets, whether they're 20, 30% or more, clearly accord with NPF 4 requirements. There is a full report on this analysis, and I will share a link with you when I can, or you can email me to request a copy. I might even see if there's a way of posting it into the chat so that you can all access it. It includes a number of recommendations, a few of which are highlighted here. I find the third point there particularly interesting, in that you should require the applicant to provide easy to understand information on the mature tree canopy cover that will result from their tree planting. Now, this is assuming that there's a target or a policy within there that has a canopy target that they're expected to meet. And if they show this easy to understand visualizations that reflect the species planted. So going back to those tables, you know, if you're planting an oak tree, it's going to have a canopy that's potentially 10 times larger than a rowan. Obviously, ensuring that the trees are planted and that they live long enough to reach maturity is key to delivering those canopy benefits. And the last point there, in order to maximise the benefits that trees provide, they must be planted within and throughout the development, not clustered into one place or planted around the periphery. So thank you for listening.
As a planner, you do not need to be a arboriculturist. You do not need to be a expert in landscape or environment or any of that kind of thing. If you look at policy 6, what it effectively asks you to do and what policy 3 effectively asks you to do is baseline what is on the site. So ask the applicant to tell you what is on the site, preferably using geospatial data. But we have, and we had students review what we'd got in over the last 2 years, and we got information about trees with photographs, with an X drawn on the photograph saying, ta-da, there's our trees. And we're taking out that one, and that one. And we couldn't tell which trees they were taking out. They weren't describing the species, and they weren't telling us how healthy or otherwise the trees were. So bottom line is, you need a baseline. If the applicant can afford a landscape architect or arboriculturalist, that's great. If they can't, what we need to do as planners is give them a baseline for themselves as to what's the bare minimum of data that we want. And what we've talked about in Glasgow is that we want them to give it to us on GIS data so that we can layer it over the environmental data, the tree canopy data that we already have, so that we can check what they're telling us is true. We want them to tell us what trees they've got there and whether they're alive, dead, healthy, about to die, or whatever. And if they've got any more information about cables and pipes, that would be great. But that's a baseline. Welcome that there are guidance that we could tell them to do on BS standards, but we have to acknowledge that some applicants just don't do that. We also need to be aware that it's not a case of quantity numbers of trees, one tree in, one tree out. We've worked out that a semi-mature tree costs an applicant, costs somebody between 3 and 8 grand. That means they can't put that many trees in, even if they're taking out a huge amount of trees. And they do not calculate the nature-based costs of their site. So they don't calculate the carbon costs. The metrics for building a building are based on bricks and mortar and the land value, and the land value does not value the trees or the biodiversity that's on the land. So we are not calculating the real cost of the total cost of development. We're not calculating at the minute the total cost of embodied carbon. What we've tried to do in Glasgow is make the data that we have available as easy and usable as possible for both our planners who are dealing with development management and for our communities. We're lucky in Glasgow that we do have some biodiversity officers and we do have some tree officers, but they are mainly focused on the work on the land that we own. And we don't have enough of them to deal with the parks and open space that we own as Glasgow City Council, let alone find the right amount of time to deal with individual planning applications. As planners, we have to trust that we are jacks of all trades and master of none. So we have written a forest and woodland strategy, and Dave McAllister, who wrote it, panicked at first, but then when he realized he was writing a strategy and that's what his skill set was, and if he replaced the word forest with the word housing, he would know how to do it. And you go and look for the data that's there, you go and look for the evidence that tells you what you need to know. Everybody knows the benefits of providing trees. Everybody knows the benefits of providing good quality biodiversity. The barrier is the cost. We can get planning and delivery money in, but we're not getting anybody deciding who's going to stewardship it. And I saw a comment in the chat that kind of said, you can't rely on trees in private gardens. You can't, because even if we condition them to stay in, they could die, or the householder could decide to take them out, and they'll ignore all the legislation around what they should do. And we don't have enough enforcement officers to chase them up because the resources aren't there. As a planning profession, we are aging. There's not enough landscape architects being trained. There's not enough planners being trained. There is a bit where I am saying to the people in my team, and we're saying to ourselves, we have to trust in our own ability. We have to trust in our own skill set, that we know how to be planners and we know how to read NPF4. And NPF4 starts by saying baseline what you've got. It also says, and we do it for everything else, understand what's going on around. So if you're going to look at where you can put more trees in streets, what we're talking about is rag rating our streets. What I mean by that is saying, understand how wide a street needs to be to take trees. What else is going on in that street? Parking, cycle parking, bins. What has to go down that street? Is there schools there? Is there going to be more buggies or wheelchairs or something on that street? Do we know where the cables and pipes are? Do we know how tall a tree can go in that street and whether it will survive? We can ask all of those questions. The professionals and landscape architects can tell us those questions. And then if we have the data in a map, we can go back to basic planning skills and ask the map. The other issue we've got is there's not enough GIS mapping going on across the country at the minute. We're aware that Improvement Service is trying to sort that out, and Improvement Service is gradually trying to get as much open data out there as possible for planners to use. The tree equity stuff that was released, and I put it into the chat, is really useful, but you have to take it with a pinch of salt. I say that because I looked at the area in Greenock where I live, and it told me our canopy cover was nearly zero. That's because 2/3 of the little area it was covering for where I live contains the cruise terminal, the container terminal, and Tesco's, which you might have half a chance of getting trees into, but highly unlikely. But the bit on the esplanade in Greenock is one of the most mature tree habitats we've got in Greenock. So you have to understand the area, but the tree equity score stuff that they've done for the whole of the UK in urban areas is a good start if you don't have your own mapping. I put the link up to the environmental digital twin, which is what we've created in Glasgow. You can see a similar one in London and a similar one in Paris. And we've just tried to capture all of the data. What you can do with that, and please play with it, is you can pick a park and you can switch on the tree layer and see where the canopy cover is for those trees. You can switch on the individual trees where we know that parks have got more data on them. And you can also say how many of those trees are going to flood by switching the flooding data on. And we're trying to make it easier for people to do that. We've just signed a memorandum of understanding with Network Rail and University of Western Scotland, because Network Rail are flying over most of Glasgow, scanning the railways. But their LiDAR that they're taking, their high resolution photos, we can AI train with the help of UWS to identify all the species and give us a really accurate map of what is actually on the ground in Glasgow, the biodiversity and the trees. If we can prove that in Glasgow, then we can help Aberdeen, Dundee, Stirling, where they are also flying to look at the railways. Scottish Government geospatial people are about to commission, or in the process of commissioning, a LiDAR scan from the low watermark for the whole of Glasgow. So information is coming rapidly to us. I will stop there, I think, because I put a whole lot into the chat. But I think the bottom line I would say is trust yourself as planners, ask for the information, see what they give you, get them to give it to you in a map. Ask for detail, even if you don't understand what that detail is, and you want to be able to visualize. X marks the spot, a hand drawing or a photograph are not good enough in a modern world, and you don't want them. And if somebody creates a GIS map and then turns it into a PDF, ask them to give you the GIS map, because then you can layer it on the data that you've already got. The complications are that for some of our colleagues and some of our councils, they don't even have access currently to a GIS map. They're using Google. So you're in a worse situation than you were 20 years ago when you could get out tracing paper. The questions, or the baseline questions you need, are in policy 6. If anybody wants help with that, come back to us. It's the same with biodiversity. We're getting caught up in English legislation. Scottish legislation is just saying baseline what is there, understand what's there, and then ask whether it's staying or not, and then look at what the applicant is saying they are going to do to enhance it. Again, I don't know one flower from another. I can hardly recognize a tree. I just know a tree is good, and I don't know species, and I failed biology when I was 14 and never did it again. But that doesn't make me a bad planner, and I am a nature-based solution expert without having any of that biological information at my fingertips, because I understand what makes a good place. And that's the bottom line of being a planner. You understand what makes a great place, and you should be trusting your own instincts and being risk aware enough to argue for that. I'm going to stop there.